I'm one of the nutritionists on the team. We are a Philadelphia-based virtual nutrition counseling company. So while we do work with a lot of weight loss clients, we also work with disease management and all different types of nutrition interests. So diabetes, PCOS, and obviously weight management, but also to maybe just people who are looking to learn a little bit more about nutrition too. So it's not really all just about weight loss, our clientele. It's kind of like across the board. So I think we got ND. I think that's North Dakota. Somebody mentioned they're interested in controlling prediabetes and weight loss. So if anybody is not a On Point Nutrition client and you're interested in our services, just feel free to schedule a free consultation with me or somebody on my team. So I work as a nutritionist, but also as like a client onboarding specialist. So feel free to send me an email if you want to schedule a call. So I'm just going to wait one more minute. Then I'm just going to go adjust something really quickly. So I'm just going to stop my video really quick. If anybody wants to send in a message too about how they found out about us, we'll just wait one more minute. Okay. All right, so like I said, I'm actually going to share my screen with you and share a PowerPoint with you. So hopefully we'll still be able to get the chat feature working. This webinar is on intuitive eating. So this year, On Point Nutrition, the company believes in bettering the team. So we're always looking for different courses to take, and our dietitians are required to do continuing education. So this year, something I did was a course on intuitive eating. And if anybody wants to send through the chat, if they know anything about what intuitive eating is, or what you think intuitive eating might be. I'm just going to get my screen set up here, sorry. All right, someone said they never heard of it. One person said they've been doing research on it. Listening to your body, what it needs in terms of hunger. I think somebody talked to me already. Listening to your body, eating what you want and need. Yeah, so it's definitely about reconnecting with your body and, you know, listening to your hunger signals. All right, so let me share this with you. Hang on one sec, sorry, I'm having a hard time. All right, so I just want to get my slideshow here. Whoops. Okay, everybody can see my screen, right? I'm pretty sure I'll still be able to see the chats as it comes through. Here we go, yes. Thank you for chatting me so I can test it out. Okay, Inez, yes. Also just got the workbook. Okay, so somebody commented that they've been reading the book by Evelyn Tribole and her partner, who actually kind of like coined intuitive eating. And they do offer a course. I reference their website in my presentation. So you just got the workbook, which is great. So I just kind of like want to start off with telling you, oops, sorry, if you just entered, I'm going to just shut off your video, and then you're already muted, so that's good. So just kind of like an overview of everything that we're going to talk about. I want to take you through the principles of intuitive eating, and then kind of explain like what is intuitive eating, what's not intuitive eating, and then go through questions and some of the principles. Just kind of like enter into some of them. So the first thing is, what is intuitive eating? So I kind of asked you guys to send me a little box, if you already knew anything about it, or what you understand intuitive eating to be. So intuitive eating is really just eating. So I was having the discussion with a client today that we need to use the word intuitive because we need to distinguish from diet culture, essentially, right? It's just eating. It's instinctual. The only reason we even have to say the word intuitive is because of kind of like, all the different ways that there are to eat now. So it's really the default mode. We're all born as babies. What do we think about babies? We know that they cry when they're hungry and then they stop eating when they're full. So we're all born knowing how to eat, but somewhere along the line that kind of gets pushed aside. And usually it's when we're kids and we don't even really know it, because we're just so immersed in diet culture as a society in the United States and obviously in other countries as well. So the default mode kind of like gets pushed aside by a toxic belief system about food. So this often happens to us, again, like when we're really young and aren't even aware of it happening. And I've had a lot of clients and have heard a lot of stories from people who say that they have kind of like deep-rooted issues that come from their childhood when it comes to eating. And if anybody can like remember a time when you were a kid, when you first heard of diet culture or diet phrases, or maybe it was like you watched your parents diet on and off, or a lot of women have stories about their moms kind of like limiting what they eat, or maybe eating something different from the family, which kind of becomes a learned behavior. If anybody wants to share anything like that, go ahead and send it in through the box, like your first experience with diet culture. So it's not a diet plan, a program, protocol, etc. It's really just instinctual eating, which sounds scary to people because we don't even know how to do that anymore. So it's really eating what you want, when you want, entrusting your body and your mind to tell you when you're full and when you've had enough. So it's rebuilding that trust between your body and your mind and the connection. Somebody mentioned that their mother was frequently on a diet and distinctly remembers the ice cream diet. I never heard of that one, but I'm sure it's a thing because there's a diet that kind of like caters to every group or every food group out there. We don't learn anything from diets. They really obviously ruin a lot of, our relationships with food and with our body and recognizing those signals. They don't teach us how to eat. They kind of like encourage rules and protocols, and that's why this is not that at all. Another thing too is intuitive eating is not a like eat until you're full diet. It's essentially, again, resetting to the default mode. And instead of using rules to dictate your food choices, you really want to try to change the focus to listening to your intuition and honoring that hunger signal that your body gives you and honoring your desires without guilt. So the thing is that food is supposed to be pleasurable. It's involved in so many things that are included in celebration. So a lot of times, food is associated with holidays and celebrations, and also too sad moments. But food is kind of like meant to be pleasurable. And the thing is that diets really like suck that out of it. So it's coming from a place where your food choices are based on self-care and not self-control. So there's no rules, no regulations, no good, bad, off limits, nothing. But another thing too is nutrition is not disregarded when it comes to intuitive eating. That doesn't mean you just kind of like eat pizza all the time. There is kind of a principle of gentle nutrition is a part of intuitive eating. So that's kind of like an overview of what intuitive eating is. Obviously, we're going to get more into that. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to send it through in the chat. We heard about the ice cream diet so far. So one thing that I might ask you guys to think about, or again, even send through the chat if you want to give some comments. What's your food relationship? This might help you determine if you need to work on it. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, if you just entered the meeting, I'm just going to go ahead and mute you, just so that we don't get any noise feedback. So what I might ask you to do is, what's your relationship with food? If you think you might need to repair your relationship with food, you might ask yourself these questions, some of these questions, to determine if you need a little bit of help repairing that relationship. So you can use this as a baseline and then maybe ask yourself these questions down the line again. One thing, or statements, not even questions. So read yourself these statements, process them, process your answers, and then use them as a baseline for improvement down the road. This is one place to start where you can determine, if this is something you need to work on or not. So I follow rules to dictate when, what, or how you eat. So kind of like think about that. If you're a person who uses rules and you dictate your meal choice based off of rules, time, that's kind of like what intermittent fasting is based off of, time, rules about timing, what to eat. So whether you're choosing carbohydrates, protein, fat, if you're following a certain diet, your food choice would be determined by that. If you ate intuitively, you would not follow rules or regulations in eating, and your food choices would not be made from a place of rules. I use food to help comfort my negative emotions. So if you feel sad, lonely, anxious, and you kind of like use food as a coping mechanism, which a lot of times people do, or at least we think we do. If you ate intuitively, you wouldn't use food to cope with emotions, because the deprivation of food actually enhances stress. And without the stress and the deprivation, emotional eating doesn't exist. So somebody asked what gentle nutrition was, and in terms of eating from a place of intuition, it means kind of like acknowledging nutrition and acknowledging the importance of, fruits, vegetables, those things in your diet, because they give us a lot of nutrients. So we're kind of incorporating those while also coming from a place where we want to eat the things that we want. Somebody asked about On Point being rules-based. I would say that On Point is kind of like in the middle somewhere. I don't think that it's necessarily rules-based. There's no off-limits foods. We try to encourage clients to eat the food that they like, while also paying attention to maybe how that fits into the daily targets that your dietitian creates for you, so that you'll see weight loss. I would say that generally intuitive eating isn't necessarily a means for weight loss. This is more of a repair for your relationship with food. You can use a lot of these principles to help you repair your relationship with food and to help increase the frequency that you have foods that you consider off limits. But it doesn't necessarily, the goal of intuitive eating is not weight loss generally. So I would say if this is something that you're interested in and like want to gear more toward intuitive eating, you can talk to your dietitian or nutritionist about it as like a different way to approach your plan maybe. So we went through kind of like the emotions comment. Someone just said, okay, so someone commented about diabetes. Because of like following rules is watching sugars and carbs in an attempt to reverse prediabetes. I think that's a little bit different when it comes to disease management. And those aren't even really necessarily food rules, because you can still have carbohydrates. Maybe there's a little bit of a limit that we set there for health reasons, but you're still kind of like incorporating foods from all food groups. And that doesn't mean that you can never eat those foods. Maybe for this specific need, it's not kind of like having a lot of fried or sweet foods. Also, intuitive eating doesn't mean that you kind of like gorge on those kind of foods either. It's listening to your body and listening to what your body needs, and then choosing those foods based off of that. The next one is, I trust my body to tell me when to eat. So intuitive eaters have a strong mind-body connection and trust their hunger and fullness signals. So if you don't know when you're hungry or when you're full, that's something that you definitely want to explore. My food and activity choices come from a place of self-care. So what I mean by that is you don't choose food or activity because you feel like you should eat it. You choose it because you want to. And same thing with activity. You want to make sure that you do activity because you want to and it feels good to you, not because you'll feel guilty if you don't, or you feel like you should in order to reach your goals. So a lot of times clients will say, like they feel guilty or bad that they didn't have a workout. We all need rest days. We all need to make sure that like our movement is coming from a joyful place and not of a place where we're told that we should do something. So that's really kind of like the outsiders coming in, and that's diet culture speaking to you. I have off-limits foods that I don't allow myself to keep or eat in the house. So I think that that's really common for a lot of people. People say they can't have candy in the house because they'll eat it, popcorn, chips, like whatever it is that you would consider to be more of an indulgent food. There are no forbidden foods in intuitive eating, and in On Point Nutrition, the mantra that we have is all foods fit. So there are no forbidden foods. We would never tell you not to eat something. All foods can fit somewhere. And that's kind of like what intuitive eating and On Point Nutrition believe too. Someone asked about intuitive eating, the opposite of comfort eating, or not so all or nothing. I think that's a good question. And actually, comfort eating, or I don't know if you mean like stress eating or emotional eating, is kind of something that I want to talk about that I'll be talking about next week. And when you eat kind of like to repair or heal your emotions, this is something I'll talk about later in the presentation too, as one of the principles. You're kind of, it's digging deep and maybe figuring out what that emotion is that's causing you to feel like you have to comfort with food. So I think when you feel that way, when you feel like you want to eat for comfort or stressy or emotionally eat, the first thing to do is maybe like have that conversation with yourself and that reflection of how am I feeling right now? And whether it's stress or anxiety or sadness, then what is it that you can do to help with those emotions that isn't food related or in addition to food? So it's kind of figuring out and dealing with your emotions instead of, like food isn't going to solve your problems really. So we have to kind of like look within and dig a little deep and figure out what it is that we need in addition to food. I hope that answers your question. Somebody commented that they were addicted to exercise when they were younger and would become depressed if they didn't work out at least an hour a day. Needless to say, that's not a healthy state to be in. This is from one of you. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting comment and perspective. I think a lot of people probably feel that way. And sometimes we get stuck in these ruts where like we feel like we have to exercise in order to be healthy, which, exercise is good for us. And it's great for our cardiovascular health, among other things. But you won't necessarily, be the picture of health if you exercise and like drive yourself to this crazy obsessive state where it just kind of like takes over your life, and that's the only thing you think about and the only thing you have time for. And it's not really going to benefit you in the same way. Somebody commented that they did a Beachbody like program and they felt so restricted when doing it and negative. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of like on point nutrition programs, and intuitive eating is the opposite of that. There's no restriction, because when we are restricted, we only want the thing that we're restricted from. And that's why when you put these foods in these off limits categories, you actually crave them more. So that's actually the next, the thing is kind of like, I get mad at myself when I eat something bad or off limits. I'm sure we've all kind of like had those thoughts, and balance is key. It'll take some time to build that trust in yourself, and you'll learn it over time and with practice. So the first thing to do is maybe stop looking at foods as bad or off limits. All foods kind of like fit somewhere. So you can play around with the frequency and how often you have those foods. But once you start allowing yourself to eat off limits foods, you'll actually crave them less, and you're less likely to overindulge in them when you do eat them. If you kind of like incorporate them into your daily and look at them as just food. So all food has nutrients. Some foods have more nutrients than others, but all foods can fit somewhere and have some type of nutrition value to them. So another kind of like look at intuitive eating versus dieting. Again, if anybody has any questions about anything we've done so far, feel free to send it. So on the left, you'll see kind of like principles of intuitive eating versus dieting. So one side of the coin and the other. So intuitive eating is not a diet. So don't use it as a diet tool or as another means to lose weight. If your intention is weight loss, you're probably going to be cutting back in some way or watching the portion size of something. Even if you wanted to do like a loose diet plan and intuitive eating, there's going to be some type of, counting your portion size and frequency of the food. So that's not necessarily what intuitive eating is about. More, again, about building your relationship. So encourages listening to your hunger and fullness cues versus following rules and restrictions, like we explained. It's just another way to look at it. So think of it simply as eating, which I'm sure to a lot of you, it might sound scary or seem impossible at first. Even after years of dieting and the immersion in diet culture, but over time, it becomes easier and easier. And then again, as you start to get better at it and the connection, your mind-body connection gets stronger, it will get easier, and your cravings and your binges will ultimately subside. So with intuitive eating, you're focusing on food, how food makes you feel. And with dieting, maybe we're focusing on how food makes us look. So a lot of times when working with clients, if they're planning to go out to lunch or planning to go out to dinner, we'll take a look at the menu beforehand. And I feel like a lot of times people want to go for the salad, but that's mainly because we think that we should, because the salad is the best option, because it's the healthiest. A lot of times salads end up having more fat and being more dense with calories than, an entree or even a sandwich or a burger. So it really depends on what's in it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good choice. You have to think about why you're making the food choices that you are. If you're making them based off of what you think you should do versus what you want, then that's something to look at. So I always ask people, what is it that you want to order? Look at that first. And when you start to think like that, your whole world will open up, because you'll start to look at menus differently. You'll start to approach parties differently by thinking about what it is that you actually want versus what you think you should have. Because a lot of times the choice that we think we should have doesn't fulfill us in some way. Maybe we're still hungry after a salad. If we would have had chicken with, bread, as in like a sandwich, that's going to fill us more maybe. Because the thing is if you have a salad and you don't feel fulfilled from it, a lot of times we go looking for something later to fulfill us because we weren't satisfied with the meal that we had and there wasn't enough carbohydrates there. So when you're looking at intuitive eating, you're making nourishing food choices, but versus making choices based on restrictions. So dieting makes you feel like you fail when you mess up and are doing good when you're eating clean. What even is that? Eating clean. So I don't even know that we really understand what that means, as in, eating dirty is the opposite. A lot of the things that we're kind of like fed from diet culture don't really make sense if you sit back and look at them. So it's kind of like designed to make you feel bad for falling off. Or a lot of times we use the phrase like falling off the wagon, when really like there's really no track or wagon to be on. So it's about honoring your desires without guilt or limitations. So with dieting, you're really like feeling guilty about feeling hungry and full sometimes, or eating too much or too much of the wrong things. So there's kind of, you can see the parallels between the two. Anybody can send comments or questions if you have. Just taking a look at kind of like the difference between the two. So I think everybody should kind of like have the gist of where we're going so far. So I want to share with you the principles of intuitive eating. So whoever mentioned that they were reading the book Intuitive Eating by Tribole and Reish, these are pretty much the principles that they've created. So number one is reject the diet mentality. And what that means really is stop letting diet culture tell you what's good and what's bad. That's it. The weight loss industry is $1 billion a year industry. It's not looking out for you or your health. So break free and listen to your body. It's essentially ditching the diet mentality. Honoring your hunger. So I mentioned this a little bit so far. You get energy from food. Carbohydrates are our body's main source of fuel. When you restrict your intake, whether it's carbohydrates or fat or whatever it is, your body is programmed to overeat when you finally do eat in order to survive. That's really just a survival mechanism that we all have. If you ever feel hangry, you're so hungry to the point that you feel ravenous. What happens? You end up overeating because you haven't eaten enough. So the kind of point is, when you're honoring your hunger, that you're eating enough so that you don't get to that point of starvation to where you overeat, which is what happens when people binge and restrict. You binge eat because you've been restricting. Binge eat or overeat, stress eat, whatever you want to call it. So once, you start listening to your body and listening to when you're hungry and honoring that by refueling, you'll kind of like get out of that pattern of binge, restrict, or whatever pattern it is. So prevent that by leaning in and detecting your body's hunger signal when it first happens and attending to it. Number 3 is make peace with food. So what that means is really like legalizing food. Give yourself permission to eat all foods. When you set limits and categorize foods as good and bad, the limits that you set ultimately force you to want to eat those foods more. Again, like when we were restricted, we want to get out. We want what we're restricted from. If you forbid certain foods, the uncontrollable cravings build up. And then when you finally do allow yourself to eat the forbidden food, you'll probably end up binging, which is why people say they can't keep a certain food in their house because they'll eat it all, because you don't allow yourself to have it. So then when you finally do have it, you overeat it because it's been off limits to you for so long and it's so good and you miss it. So when you kind of like legalize all foods and learn to eat them in moderation, your cravings and your binging will subside. And it might sound really far off for somebody, for some of you, but it takes time. It takes time and you just have to practice. So legalize all foods, learn to eat them in moderation. That's kind of making peace with food. Number 4 is challenge the food police. So challenge the negative, the off-limits foods, the ads, the outsiders telling you what you should do. Anything that you've seen on Instagram of people like telling you what you should do when people don't even know you. Again, this industry is $1 billion a year industry. So your health is not the first concern. It's really just making money. So you don't need to listen to other people telling you what you should do. Food is meant to be pleasurable. So discovering satisfaction. When you rediscover how you feel when you eat something, it'll be easier to determine if you've had enough of it. So sometimes we don't even like the food that we binge on. We just do it because we put those foods as off limits. So step 5 is or principle 5 is really kind of a fun one, because you can learn what flavors and food elements you truly enjoy. So a lot of times I've heard clients say, or I've experienced it myself, where maybe we're eating something just because it's there. We don't even necessarily like it maybe. That's because maybe we're restricted in another way. So we're kind of like just looking for whatever it is to satisfy us. So really like savoring your food, tasting it, experimenting with foods, different spices, to figure out what it is that you actually like. Have that like relationship with your food. Number 6 is feel your fullness. So practice listening to your body. Build trust in your body. That's how you do it, is you just start listening to your body. Build that trust in your body to tell you when it's full and when you need more. Too often, diet culture tells us to reject our hunger signals, which ruins our ability to trust our bodies. A lot of times, you might not eat if you feel hungry because you feel like you shouldn't, because you'll be off plan or you'll be breaking the rules. There are no rules, remember. So that ruins our ability to trust our bodies. Practice by pausing in the middle of eating a snack or eating and checking in with yourself and ask yourself, are you enjoying what you're eating? Are you closer to feeling full? Do you need more? So maybe that's one way that you can start to honor your hunger, and then back to 6, feel your fullness. Like have that check-in moment. Maybe you write it down every time you eat a meal. Number 7 kind of relates to what somebody had asked about comfort eating. So cope with your emotions with kindness is the principle. I kind of look at that as figure out if you're stress eating, emotional eating. Food is comforting, it's true, but it doesn't help you fix your emotions if you're feeling troubled. So you have to get to the root of your issues in a way that doesn't involve food. So maybe that's, you have to figure out something self-care for yourself. So, you know, a lot of times if you're feeling like you're stressed, maybe tea will help you relax, or maybe going for a walk, calling a friend, doing a workout, if that's something that you feel will bring you joy and relax you. So you have to figure out the emotion and then attend to that in a way that doesn't involve food. Maybe it does involve food too, but if you attend to it maybe with an activity or in another way before you use food, you're less likely to overeat. Number 8 is respect your body. So your body deserves your respect. You only get one. Start with respecting your body and just practice doing that. And then you might eventually like, maybe even love your body. So I know a lot of times negative feelings toward our bodies is what tends to lead us into diet culture in the first place. And a lot of that comes from the media or pressure to look a certain way, which are kind of like perfection standards that are unattainable. So start by respecting your body, and the positive feelings toward that will grow. The next one is movement. So focus on how movement makes you feel. We talked about this a little bit, not how often you think you should be doing it. So make sure that the movement comes from a place where you actually feel good about it and it's something that you like to do. I've had clients tell me, you know, their goal is to run that week, but then they just consistently aren't doing it. So then it's comes down to like, is this something that you actually like doing and want to do? And if the answer is no, then maybe you need to find a different activity that you do enjoy doing. So make sure that your movement comes from a place of that and not rules or what you think you should do. And then 10 is that gentle nutrition principle. So you don't have to be perfect to be healthy. Progress and not perfection is kind of, you know, what you want to aim for. Nobody can be perfect. If you overeat one day, you're not suddenly unhealthy or failing or deficient in nutrients just from one day. So that's something to kind of like remember is, you know, nutrition is always going to be the goal for on-point nutrition. And one of our goals is to teach people why they're doing what they're doing and understanding your body and how it reacts to the food you eat. So that's why we don't create rules or put foods off limits or anything like that. Somebody asked if how to ensure that you're eating enough. I tend to restrict too much, not even on purpose, during the day and then binge at night. So one thing that you can maybe start doing, which maybe this isn't a rule around eating, but have the thought process of making sure that you're eating enough during the day, which means maybe make sure that you're just eating frequently. So you can kind of start with maybe set an alarm to eat if it's been too long, because then you can kind of remind yourself, okay, check in with yourself. It's like a check-in alarm. When was the last time you've eaten? Should you eat something? And I think that's actually pertains to one of the things that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is like filling your tank. Anybody have any questions about the principles? I also cited the website down below if you want to read a little bit more about that from the people who coined it. So I just want to expand upon the first principle, which is rejecting the diet mentality. So we talked about this a little bit. One thing that I just want to go into with it is diets don't work. Most people end up gaining the weight they lost because it's usually too rapid and unsustainable and then some. So something like Whole30. What happens on day 31? We don't really know. That doesn't teach us anything. We don't learn anything about our body. What we learn is rules with food when you follow something like that. So most people end up, again, gaining back what you lost and then more because you don't really know what to do for your body. So diet mentality thoughts have been a part of the background noise in your mind for so long that you probably don't have much experience even noticing them. But once you do, you can start to change them. You can start to separate. Diet mentality thoughts start when we're young. We don't even notice them. Maybe that's like a learned behavior that we picked up from somebody, or we start kind of like comparing ourselves to others, whatever the case. And as we know, chronic dieting leads to weight cycling or yo-yo dieting. Because again, they don't teach us anything. We don't know what we're doing. And we kind of like get away from listening to our bodies. Diet culture kind of teaches you to do that. Diets encourage rules and restrictions about eating times, levels of intake, creates guilt. We talked about this a lot. So the first principle is really letting all that go. Letting go of good, bad, allowed, not allowed. Instead, use your intuition to help guide you. So one of the big things I just kind of want to mention with rejecting the diet mentality is it really steals our energy and takes over our life when we're consumed with something of a diet and the rules. We feel restricted from doing things with friends, family, anything surrounding food. A lot of clients talk about having anxiety about going out to eat, going to family events. The holidays just passed, and now everything is kind of like new year, new me mentality. It really like steals our energy and takes over our life. If you didn't spend so much time worrying about rules and restrictions and the things that you can't do, you would have so much more room to do something that you can do and that you want to do, or pick up a new hobby. It's really kind of like a happiness thief. Somebody just commented that this is a good story for us. They went away to college and ate very nutritiously and learned in college, or what they wanted in college was a butterscotch brownie. So that's what they chose over healthy food. So that's how they got to the unhealthy state that they're in. Not sure that intuitive eating makes sense. So I think that's a really good comment. Sometimes when we allow ourselves to have the food that we're craving, we think that maybe we'll like go off track. And this is where the sense of gentle nutrition comes into play, because we want to make sure that we're still incorporating foods that give us a little bit more nutrient value than others. So it's kind of that gentle nutrition principle is kind of making sure that you're still including those things in addition to the foods that maybe you want. So if we were going to look at a plate of an intuitive eater, people are not just eating pizza and brownies in this case all the time, all day, every day, but we're not saying no to brownies is what it is. Well, if you just joined the meeting, I'm actually just going to turn off your video just so that you only see the screen. So the point is, if you kind of like allowed yourself to eat brownies, that doesn't, eventually you would want other foods as well. You wouldn't just eat brownies for every single of your meals. I promise you wouldn't. It might take some time, but that's why I kind of like paying attention to incorporating fruits and vegetables and, you know, a well-rounded diet. That's kind of like the first principle. So you can kind of like start doing that by shifting your thoughts simply. So with intuitive eating, you have full permission to eat the things that you want. Food is not clean, dirty, good, bad. Intuitive eaters eat all food groups. Again, maybe this kind of helps with your point. So the diet mentality would kind of say like, I shouldn't eat that. I ate so clean today is kind of a diet mentality thing to think. I don't eat carbs, sugar, fat. That's what maybe a dieter would say. Sorry, it looks like I swapped the bottom two. It should say like you wouldn't punish yourself for eating through exercise, whereas in the diet mentality, you ate a lot of calories and felt that you needed to exercise. So just have to swap that at the bottom. So practice shifting your thoughts. You know, if you're more on the diet mentality side, start thinking about from the intuitive eating side. Next, the principle 2, just to go into this a little bit more, is honoring your hunger, like we talked about. So after years of yo-yo dieting and being immersed in this way of thinking, you are probably disconnected from, when I say hunger and fullness cues, that's the feeling of being hungry. And then recognizing when you've eaten enough and you feel satisfied. When you consistently deprive yourself, you might find it hard to stop eating even after you're full because you haven't really been eating enough. Deprivation creates an overwhelming desire for carbohydrates. So that's why binge foods tend to be on carb foods. So a lot of times when people have like off-limits foods or foods that they binge on, it usually ends up being starchy food because our body craves carbohydrates. That's what we need for energy. So we need to turn carbohydrates into glucose, which we can use for energy. It's harder to break down glucose from carbohydrates and fat for energy. So a lot of times when we restrict carbohydrates, we feel really tired, sluggish, because we need energy from carbs in order to operate. When your body has to break down protein to convert to glucose, that's not good. We need protein to help build our bodies. You know, that's the building blocks of our cells, if you've ever heard that in a science class. That's what helps us grow our hair. That's what helps us to have strong bones. You know, the building blocks for everything. Somebody just mentioned that they joined a little late. sorry, it's an Eastern time. We are recording the webinar and we will post it onto the website soon. Maybe not tomorrow. It'll be up there sometime this week. And then in order to break that cycle, that's the principle too, honoring your hunger. So once you start deprivation, you'll eventually get to a place where food is food. You rebuild trust in yourself and with food. That's kind of like principle 2 in a nutshell. If anybody has any questions, feel free to send them through. This is what I had mentioned that we would get to in a little bit, was eating enough. Somebody had a question about this. So this is like filling your metaphorical tank. If you think about your body as like an engine or a gas tank, you're thinking about filling your tank for energy, for gas, right, to move our car. So having enough food is really essential for you to recover from binge, restrict, diet culture, the way that you restore your trust in your body, again, is to listen to those signals and to make sure that you eat enough. So Chrissy Harrison, who I took my course through, mentions a fueling analogy. So if you think about your body as a car, think about when you add gas to your car. You don't add gas to your car when you're on empty, because you could run out of gas before you get there. So that's kind of like when we're on empty. It's almost too late to eat at that point, because then we need a lot of gas to build us up, to run our cars. So we eat more than we need at that time, or than we want to eat at that time. So think about your body as like a gas tank. You would really stop for gas when you got like half the way full, empty, or a quarter of the way. You wouldn't wait until you were empty, because you could run into like an emergency situation. So when you talk about you don't eat enough throughout the day and then end up eating more later, think about your body as a car and the gas tank, that you want to always kind of have it at least a quarter of the way full, so that you don't end up needing more gas or overeating later. Hope that makes sense. So binging is the direct result of not eating enough. The way to heal and to fix that is to make sure that you eat enough throughout the day. So that's also giving yourself permission to eat. So don't only allow like diet foods to trick your body into thinking that you ate enough. Hunger is essential to living. So stop looking at it as something that you want to suppress. Over time, the more that you do that, the more you'll build trust in your body. So stop when you've had enough. So yeah, I just kind of went through the basis of intuitive eating and went into detail on a couple of the principles. On the next section, I want to talk a little bit more about stress eating and some of the other principles. So does anybody have any questions or discussion that they want to send through the chat? Or if you want to leave any, talk, you can unmute yourself at this point. I know I kind of gave everybody a lot of info. I'm proud that everybody stuck with me to this point, because I know looking at a PowerPoint isn't always entertaining. Somebody asked what the best way to start is. So I think, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. So the best way to start, I think, is to maybe think about that food relationship questionnaire. Think about what it is that you need to work on. I think the best way to start is probably with principle 1, rejecting the diet mentality. If you feel like you're maybe like already doing that, then you can start to kind of like pay attention to listening to your body when you're eating. Maybe make that mental note of like how food tastes to you. If you feel like you need more, if you feel like you're ready to stop, practice listening to when you feel hungry and when you feel full, and building the hunger and fullness signals. Somebody asked, is there a food questionnaire? Did I miss it? I just gave a few statements, about intuitive eating, and asked everybody to kind of like sit with those. So it was like Do you follow food rules that dictate when or how you eat? Do you use food to comfort negative emotions? Do you trust your body to tell you what to eat or when? Does activity come from a place of self-care, or is it coming from diet culture or a place where I feel like I should do something? Do you have off-limits foods that you don't keep in the house or don't allow yourself to have? Do you get mad at yourself for eating something bad or off-limits? So if you feel like you identify with those and say yes to those more than not, then there might be something to like work on there. I'm waiting for any other questions that you guys might have. To the person who mentioned that they were reading the intuitive eating book, do you have any experience kind of like adopting a more intuitive eating style that you want to share with everybody? Hi.
Hi, I'm Emily.
Hi.
Hi. No, thanks for tonight. This was great. I think the thing that that I appreciated about the book that's been really helping me think for the last couple of weeks is that question about using food with negative emotions, because
Yeah.
I mean, I think we all do that, right? Where you're like frustrated and stressed out and you want to eat that ice cream pint, but for me, it isn't always like deep, horrible emotions. I appreciated in that the chapter in the book kind of talked about distraction and boredom, and that I actually ended up putting a mood tracker on my phone.
Ooh.
So that when I find myself like walking, it's hard right now that we work at home, right? If I walk into the kitchen and open the cabinet, I'm trying to stop and like track my mood, and it's almost always just the blah mood.
Yeah, that's really interesting and really like good that you did that.
Yeah, and there are other things I can do to get a break from work that aren't my cabinet. So
yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because there is a lot of like bored eating, or especially with everything that's going on with COVID. I think, obviously a lot of us are stressed, but sometimes the snacking levels were up because we were bored. So that's another thing to check in with yourself. So how are you feeling? I love that mood tracker idea. That's great. So it's whatever that emotion is that drives you maybe to eat. If you're not necessarily feeling a hunger signal, and then checking in and figuring out how to attend to that. So going for a walk. A lot of people picked up, like new activities during this, doing puzzles, doing Zoom meetings with friends, walking our pets, or somebody I know like picked up singing lessons on Zoom. So we have to kind of like attend to that in a creative way, maybe. Thanks for your comment. Anybody else? Comments or questions? So, as I said, if you're an On Point Nutrition client, the recording of this will be available on your member portal, as well as all of the past webinars that we've done, a little bit more interactive with cooking demos in some of them. If this is something you're interested in and you're already working with our team, maybe like talk to your nutritionist or dietitian if you feel like you want to shift more toward focusing on this style. And then also, if you're interested in working with our team, feel free to send me an email and schedule a consultation. And if anybody has any questions, you want to talk to me personally, feel free to do that. And I am going to be on here next week as well. So I hope to see everybody next week and hear from everybody soon. Thanks.